Schools Work podcast, a podcast for everyone in education. This show is brought to you by the Southern Regional Education Board. At SREB, we believe that every school has the potential to be great. Whatever you do in the school, whatever your job may be, let's talk about things that make schools work. Hello and welcome back. This is Ashley. So, when this episode goes out, it will be the last day of our conference, and this is the last episode in our week of conference season 2 preview episodes. So I hope that you've listened to all of them and you've enjoyed them, but this is also the last episode in our AI series, and I've hoped you've listened to all those and enjoyed those too. And if not, please go back and listen to them all. They've all been great. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about something different. So the past 5 episodes in this series have been on the Guidance on AI in K-12 Instruction report that Leslie and her subcommittee put together and created. And we've talked about each of those pillars and we gave an introduction to the report. So today we're shifting gears a little bit. We're going to talk about the checklists they created to go with the report. And if you've done all the things that we've talked about in the last episode, you kind of have thought about what you want out of AI and how you want to use it in your classroom or in your school. And now it's time to pick some tools to use. So if you want to pick a tool, you shouldn't just go and find the first one that you see. You want to evaluate it just like you would do any other thing that you would bring into your school. And so this checklist is kind of a guide on how to pick an AI tool to use in your school or in your classroom. It has things like questions to ask vendors, things you need to think about, all that. So that's what I'm going to talk about with Leslie today. And let's get started with that. See you next time. Hi, Leslie. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I am great. I know technically this is before New Orleans, but in the time that people are listening, this is our last day of the conference. Can you believe it's over already?
I can't. But it's been a lot of fun. I always enjoy seeing teachers and working with teachers and showing them the highlights and wonders of project-based learning.
So we are actually, the two of us are on the AI Commission, and the AI Commission is meeting at the same time in New Orleans. So by the time this episode's airing, we'll be in 2 places at once. There will be clones of us. We're going to be going between the AI Commission meeting and the Making Schools Work conference. Yeah. It's a great day to release an AI-themed episode in our week of podcasts. So yeah. In this one, we're going to talk about the checklist that you created. It goes along with the report that we spent the last 5 weeks talking about together. So tell me a little bit about this checklist, what it is, how you created it. And by you, I mean the subcommittee. So give all of them all the credit. I know it was a team effort here. But can you tell me all about it?
Well, yes. And I would say the checklist, the base of the checklist is we were adapting from a checklist from another organization. So we really, as we looked at the different organizations, we're looking at how to select tools for AI use in the K-12 classroom. The workforce ed tech's process, or I wouldn't say their checklist, their list of questions was a great starting point. And we recognized that we could improve upon it, but we weren't going to create anything from scratch better than what they've started with. So we actually started with their questions, their checklist, and then added in revised questions, added in other questions based on the collective experience of other research, other frameworks, and more updated information. So we started there and then refined and improved upon what Workforce Ed Tech had already started. I want to make sure I give credit where credit is due.
Thank you. Yeah. I appreciate that. We talked in the last episode about plagiarism. We don't want anybody thinking we're faulting anybody.
Yeah. Now, what I will say, one of the things that we did add to that is recognizing that any technology tool procurement in a district takes place in a process with people. And I think where AI is concerned, we wanted to stress that this is super important. This cannot be one person in the district responsible for procuring the tools. We did recommend that you have ideally a subcommittee or a technology committee that has teachers at the table, school leaders at the table, the district technology specialist at the table, so that you are choosing tools that have instructional use in the classroom. And so we divided up the process into 4 phases. You have a design phase, and that's where the initial committee meets and really looks at what are the learning goals, or what are the goals for this tool within the school or district. Then the procurement phase, this is where you're going to go out and interview the vendor, but then think through, right, how this tool is going to be used. Is the information that you're getting from the vendor, good, and where you're going to pick the best one for your local need and context, both like where you are technology, what technology infrastructure you have, and how this tool can support into that while also supporting learning goals. But then in the getting ready for deployment and implementation phase, really considering the professional development that teachers need to go through in order to use this tool appropriately in their classroom, ethically, with students in mind, and, launch it across the district. And I think most importantly, this is not a one and done. You need to monitor and evaluate the use of the tool, and especially with the eye towards data privacy, decisions based on the tool, that sort of thing. So one of the things we did add is sort of this is recognizing that this takes place in a process, and there are different questions you need to ask yourself in each of those phases.
Right. So let's talk about just a beginning question. School, maybe they are starting this process. Let's talk about the beginning phases of this. So maybe there's a new tool and a school's deciding whether they should get it. What is the very first step they should take, and why?
Well, I mean, I think the first thing is identifying what need is this thing going to solve within our context. Right? Is it going to be an instructional tool? Is it a tool for the adults in the building? Is it a tool that's going to support discipline, or like what need does this need to fulfill? And then I would also look at, do we already have tools that fulfill this need? Like, do we need an AI solution to this? How will AI improve upon what we're already doing? And, is a tool needed at this time to support this need?
Yeah. So I think that's important to recall. I know that how many tools have you had in your career that the school gets for you and then you never use it, and then it just was wasted money? Nobody wants just, another thing that I have to learn. So I like that idea of, let's find a reason why we're getting this. Why do we need it?
That's why I also think it's super important to talk to the teachers who would be the end users of this tool, right? If you're expecting them to use it in the classroom, you also need to think about the teaching strategies that are going on and how they would use it in the classroom. To do every teacher, but, I do remember early on in the technology integration stuff in my career, for example, we had somebody order, I don't know if they're called plickers or stuff, where a class set for everybody. Ask me how many times I used it. 0. Absolutely 0. Because my classroom, the only thing that you could use it for was multiple choice questions. Engineering is not a multiple choice discipline. So it really, and I'm not preparing them for necessarily a multiple choice test. I'm preparing them to solve problems. So it meant absolutely nothing in my classroom, and I never used it. Had I been asked, I would have, for a technology that I could have used, I might have been able to use that money for something else. So I do think you do have to take the time, slow down a little bit, and think about not only what's the instructional need that it's going to be used, but really think about, and is it necessary for what you need it to do? And does it fit within your pedagogy model, right, of how you're trying to teach kids? And if you might also find that, okay, maybe it would be used, but teachers understanding of how it would be used, that's where we're going to need to develop them later on. So we need to also know, like, what's our capability of the adults in order to use this tool appropriately and correctly. And if there's like minimal, like, there's not, we're starting from ground zero where technology use is considered, we need to make sure that we're providing the professional development after we procure the tool to really support its use in the classroom.
One really nice feature of the checklist is that you have a list of questions directly for vendors that is separate so that anybody that wanted to use it could print it out or just take that page if they're emailing it and send it to vendors and get their answers or get them to prepare for the meeting you're going to have. But they don't have this report right directly in front of them right this second. We're just talking about it on a podcast episode. So what kind of questions should schools ask AI vendors before adopting the tool? And is there any red flags they should watch for?
Sure. Well, I mean, the biggest thing, and the subcommittee really helped me to understand this better, is how is data being used? Where is the data stored? Is there a possibility of data getting sold to a third party? How is the AI system using data to make decisions? I think those are all, it's kind of like a classification of questions, but those are all really important questions to best understand, is this AI system the right use for us? And is it compliant with federal, state, or local policies, privacy, data privacy policies?
My next question was going to be, data privacy and bias are huge concerns with AI. What should we be thinking of as we're doing it? But you've already kind of addressed that. So let's see, is there anything else other than the data privacy that they should be asking for or looking for when they're talking to vendors?
Well, I think the second part of that question to also be looking at is you want to minimize bias for your local context. So thinking about the makeup of students, where they're coming from, what, their demographics. Has the AI system been trained on or machine learned on data that's representative of your student population? So you do want to have conversation to help minimize the bias. And is that an important thing for for this AI system? So I think that's an important part of the conversation beyond just the federal, state, or local privacy regulations. As we talked about in our podcast on personalized learning in particular, you want to be very careful and develop, and part of your professional development process with AI in your district should include conversations with the adults on how we use student identifiable information in the systems. So teachers will need to be developed on what are the appropriate uses and what are the absolute do not do this uses.
All right. And I would also think you would want to be prepared to, you said in your first step that one of the first things you should see is, do we need this? And is it actually going to address a need? And I would think when you're talking to the vendor, you would want to make sure that tool is actually going to address that need.
Yeah.
So a thing to think about.
You just picked off another thing to think about, I think, in that too, is, will this tool address the need? But, one of the things that I'm also hearing from our committee members is that just because a vendor says their system uses AI does not mean that their system uses AI. And so if that's what you're intending, because you're looking for, they could use fancy programming. I mean, I guess every tool is using fancy programming, but they may be using really good programming, but it's not really taking advantage of an AI technology. So not all AI technologies are created equal or even using AI as part of their process. So you may want to be careful about what you're looking for. And we do have some questions that help to guide those conversations.
I've heard that in my subcommittee meetings too, and in other full commission meetings where it's AI is kind of the buzzword for technology.
Right.
That's how people use it, and not necessarily actually AI. And so that is a good point. And I know your checklist addresses this. That's why we're talking about it in this episode. But let's talk about once the school has selected a tool, they've talked to the vendor, they've got it, they're doing it. how can they make sure it's implemented effectively across the classroom and not just installed and forgotten like the tool that you mentioned earlier?
Professional development. And you're gonna have to provide time and money to developing your teachers on the use of this tool. So we are currently working in our committee meetings on a recommendations for professional development and what this looks like. One way that it does not look like is an asynchronous virtual thing where teachers click through things and, oh, you're now an expert. There needs to be time for teachers to use the tool alongside expert users of the tool where they can get their questions answered and they can try it out before they try it with kids. There might also need to be some planning support along the way. It doesn't have to happen at the initial use, the initial PD, but there needs to be some coming back to seeing how they're using it, sharing it amongst themselves. At SREB, we're big advocates on, there's a lot of buzzwords, professional learning communities, learning teams, groups of critical friendship, you can put in the buzz, but there's something to be said that as teachers get first introduced to the tool and then they launch it, having time with colleagues who are also using the tool with the same grade level, same subject area of students and how they're using it and sharing, hey, this is how I'm using it. This is what's going well. Here's where I'm struggling. Another teacher might be able to support that teacher on getting through that struggle and learning from each other. So I think embedding in part of that process, some type of place where teachers are getting together and learning from each other. And in that case, you don't necessarily need the expert in the room. You need more of somebody who can facilitate that conversation.
All right. And so that kind of leads me into my next question, which is we've got it up, we've got it in, we've implemented it, we've done this PLC, we've trained our teachers. And I think part of your answer to this next is going to be that continuous training that you just said, but
Yes.
I don't think it'll be your full answer.
Oh, one and done.
So how should schools evaluate whether it's actually working and doing what it intended to do after they've done the implementation stage?
I am a big believer in going in and seeing what's happening in the classrooms. That's one level of just having school leaders go in and see it in action. How are students working with it? How are teachers working it into the lesson plans? I know that's a longer process and you can't do everybody all the time, but look and see it in action. It might also be looking at whatever the learning goal is, think about what are some qualitative indicators that would show improvement in that learning goal, and look at that data, pull that data. It can't all be qualitative. You do need to also have some quantitative data in there. Survey your teachers, survey the students. We've launched this new thing. How are you using it? Where have been your successes? Where are your struggles? What have you noticed from your students? Because one thing to always consider is when you make a change, especially if you're using things like test scores may not immediately rise after a change. It may take 3 years because your first year is you're kind of getting to know the strategy or getting to do it, and it's messy and it's complex and it may not be perfect. But as teachers fine tune things, the student outcomes get better and better. So the first year you can see a dip in student outcomes before you start seeing an improvement in student outcomes. So I always recommend don't just dump something after the first year if it doesn't appear to be working. Look at what problems are being solved and what new problems have creeped up and develop strategies to overcome those new problems, and give it at least 3 years before you abandon, unless it's completely burning and crashing to the ground, right? If it's doing active harm and you don't see a way around it, then abandon it. But generally speaking, we abandon things too quickly and we don't allow people to have that struggle time with something new before they can perfect it.
Okay, so I might give a scenario here to maybe walk through what you just said. So let's say I'm a school and I'm the head decider at the school, and I talk to all my teachers and I find out that we need to improve reading proficiency across the elementary grades. And so I find an AI tool that says it's going to do that. I do all your stuff. I train the teachers. Now I'm in the evaluation process. So I'm going to look at proficiency levels in testing and see if that's going up. But I'm also going to survey teachers. I'm going to survey the students about how they feel about the tool. I'm going to provide the training. And at the end of the first year, if I see a little dip in proficiency levels instead of a raise, unless there are other reasons to show that this tool is not working how it's working, maybe I saw another school that's been using it for 5 years. They said, oh, it failed every year. Outside of a reason like that, assuming my responses from my teachers and my students are still good, I'm going to keep trying. I'm going to use year 2 and year 3 and keep looking at those proficiency levels and tuning the process with my teachers and my students. Safe to say that's what you just told me to do? Did I miss it?
I think so. I think so.
All right. So then at the end of year 3, I'm going to check again and I'm going to see all that quantitative data. And now those numbers are going to mean more than they did that first year. And I'm going to say, wow, the proficiency level has gone way up. This was a success. Hopefully.
Yes, we're going to continue to look at that and refine it. Now, if it's not working, right, then say, all right, this is not working, but we know more. Think about what you now know about how that tool is used, how we can use it in our system. And maybe this isn't the right tool, but we have some information that we can better use to choose a replacement for this.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that there's a need there. If you've done the design phase right, there was a need that needed to be fulfilled. And you're constantly trying to see, am I meeting that need? And if not, I think it goes back to at SRAB, we use a problem solving process that supports sort of a plan, do, study, act, right? We want to plan it. We want to study the data that we're getting. No, we want to implement it. We want to collect data, see if it's working. And then we want to act to create changes, like do the next thing. Yes.
Well, my personal philosophy in life is it's not a failure if you learned from it. And so I think that's kind of like that idea of if you try something and you do this process and you learn what's not going to work for your school, in the next thing you try, you're going to find something that does work for your school because you know what not to get. Now, then the tool that you tried, assuming you did all the other steps, the way you did your research and you did the legwork before, then it was not a failure. It was a learning process. So
it was a learning process. Yeah, we need to learn from our processes just as we ask students to do that.
Right. So I do want us to end on the same question I asked you at every other week, because I think it's just very practical and a good way to end. I have written down if a teacher listening, but for this episode, I'm going to change it. If a school district, a school leader, whoever it might be, is listening to this episode right now, and tomorrow they want to start this process, they're going to download the checklist. What's one thing that they can do to get started with it?
Well, I mean, we've talked about identifying a need. I mean, I would say look around, and if there is something that you are looking to implement or looking to improve in terms of learning outcomes, in terms of support for teachers, in terms of behavioral supports, get very clear about what change you want to see as a result of implementing this thing. Now, I would say that for anything, whether it be an AI tool or a tech tool or a new teaching strategy, what's the change you want to see happen? Get very clear about that before you get into the process. And then I can't stress enough I have a heart for teachers. I'm a teacher advocate. Teachers are some of the most smart and creative people that I know. And so have teachers at the table in those conversations when you start to think about what tool that we want to use and how we're going to use it, especially like if you're trying to get something specific for the English classroom. Have an English teacher in there If you want to use a tool in a certain CTE discipline, have a CTE teacher there. If it's something that's going to be used throughout the school, maybe have a couple teachers from different disciplines in as part of the conversation.
When I was planning this question out, had it in my head what I thought your answer would be. I think at this point all my answers, all my thoughts on these questions are just like filtered through my Leslie brain.
That's a great place, I've been told.
I thought, and it's a little different than what I thought you were going to say, but basically the same, which is don't do it on your own. Don't just make decisions on your own. The first thing you should do is get a team together, and that team should include teachers.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you so much for doing this whole series. It's over. You're done. So thank you so much for giving me so much of your time over the last few weeks. I've definitely appreciated it. And hopefully everybody listening has also appreciated it. I hope they learned a lot and that they download the report and the checklist, both of which completely free. No walls that you have to put in all your contact information, though we would love to hear from you, and feel free to give us your contact information so that we can talk more. But we don't require it to get the report and the checklist. So please go download those and start figuring out how to effectively and ethically use AI in your classrooms and your schools.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode brought to you by the Southern Regional Education Board. SREB is a nonprofit dedicated to improving education from pre-K all the way to PhD and into the workforce. Visit sreb.org for resources on instructional practices, teacher data, career pathways, and more. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow us on social media. You can find us on Facebook at SREB-School Improvement and on Twitter/X and Instagram, both at SREB Education. See you next week.